The girl's life under her stepmother's reign of cruelty was a relentless storm, a ceaseless series of punishments and humiliations designed to break her spirit. From the earliest memories she could summon, she had been subjected to a life carefully constructed to make her feel small, powerless, and insignificant. Each day began before the sun had fully risen, with the stepmother's sharp voice cutting through the quiet of the house, summoning her to chores that were endless and exhausting. She swept floors until the dust seemed to reappear as quickly as it had been removed, washed dishes that were never enough to satisfy the household, and scrubbed pots and pans until her hands bled, yet no one acknowledged her labor. Praise was non-existent. Even small successes were met with scorn or indifference, reinforcing the lesson that her value was measured only by her ability to endure, never to excel. Every word she spoke was scrutinized, every misstep remembered. The stepmother had perfected the art of psychological torment, ensuring that even minor failures became proof of her supposed inadequacy. A stammered answer at breakfast could lead to hours of forced repetition or kneeling on the cold floor, while a misplaced piece of laundry could result in scolding that lasted long into the evening. The girl learned early to anticipate the stepmother's wrath, to navigate her moods like a fragile boat crossing stormy waters. Fear became a constant companion, yet it never managed to snuff out the quiet ember of determination that glowed deep within her. She learned to hide it behind downcast eyes and obedient nods, masking the spark that would one day fuel her reclamation of power. The humiliation extended beyond physical punishment. Gossip in the village, often whispered by women who once appeared friendly, painted her as weak, strange, or cursed. Children, guided by the example of adults, mocked her appearance and voice, imitating her in cruel games and sneering when she passed by. Even the elders who might have intervened, turned a blind eye or muttered vague disapproval without action, leaving her isolated in a sea of scorn. The girl absorbed it all silently, internalizing the lesson that resistance invited further cruelty, yet she refused to allow it to define her. Each insult, each laugh at her expense, became fuel, adding layers of resolve to her hidden strength. Her day-to-day existence was a balance between survival and endurance. She learned to navigate the household with caution, timing her movements to avoid confrontation and memorizing the stepmother's unpredictable reactions. Meals were often scarce or deliberately unappetizing, designed to remind her of her supposed worthlessness. Clothing, handed down and worn thin, mocked her in the eyes of the village whenever she ventured outside. Yet even in these conditions she found small acts of rebellion, quiet gestures that reminded her she still possessed agency. A carefully hidden flower, a stolen moment by the river to breathe in the wind, or a whispered promise to herself became acts of silent defiance that nurtured her spirit. The stepmother's cruelty extended to her relationships with others. Friends were forbidden, play was limited or punished, and any interaction that might give her confidence or joy was carefully dismantled. The girl learned that trust was dangerous, that alliances could be weapons if her stepmother chose to manipulate them. And yet, this constant observation and calculation honed her mind, sharpening her awareness of human behavior and the patterns of power and fear. She became an astute observer of motives, learning the subtle signs of deception, the hidden strengths of those around her, and the weaknesses her stepmother relied upon to maintain control. In this way, her enforced solitude and oppression cultivated a keen intellect that would later serve her well. Despite all this, the girl never completely lost herself. There were moments, fleeting and fragile, when her inner light flared. A song hummed quietly under her breath, a memory of kindness from a long-forgotten parent, or a glance at the distant hills beyond the village reminded her that life extended beyond the walls of her confinement. These moments were rare yet vital, for they preserved a sense of identity that the stepmother could never extinguish. Each tiny flicker of hope was a seed, and though the soil of her life was harsh, it remained capable of nurturing growth. Shame and embarrassment were daily companions. The stepmother orchestrated public humiliations that the girl could neither escape nor ignore. Whether it was being called forward during village gatherings to display some trivial inadequacy or having her mistakes recounted to others as lessons in obedience, each act was calculated to erode her confidence. Yet, rather than breaking her, these moments were internalized and transformed into lessons in resilience. She learned to endure, to observe the intentions behind actions, and to store knowledge that would one day become the foundation of her own power. Her physical endurance was tested continually. The chores were designed to exhaust her, the punishments to cause pain, and the expectations to be impossible. Yet her body, though often bruised and fatigued, adapted to the demands, growing stronger even under duress. Every ache and pain became familiar, teaching her the limits of suffering and the ways to endure it. She discovered the ability to focus despite distraction, to keep moving when her energy waned, and to conserve strength for moments that demanded it. This training of body and mind, forced though it was, laid the groundwork for her eventual reclamation of control. Loneliness weighed heavily on her, a constant companion that neither age nor experience could alleviate. Even when surrounded by others, she was isolated, treated as invisible or contemptible. Yet in this solitude she cultivated self-reliance, learning to depend on her own thoughts, her own instincts and her own judgment. The stepmother's intent had been to destroy her confidence and make her dependent, but paradoxically, this very isolation produced a resourcefulness and independence that could not be taken away. The girl became her own ally, a silent witness to her stepmother's tyranny, and an unbreakable vessel of potential. Despite all suffering, a spark of defiance persisted. It was quiet and hidden, known only to her, yet it refused to die. Every act of cruelty she endured became a reason to endure more, to learn more, to plan more. She imagined the day she could stand without fear, when her stepmother's voice would hold no power over her. Though she could not yet envision the form her triumph would take, she felt the shape of it growing within her. Each whispered thought of revenge, of justice, of reclamation, was a brick laid in the invisible structure of her eventual victory. By the time she reached adolescence, the girl had become a master of endurance. Pain, humiliation, and shame had sculpted her body, mind, and spirit into a vessel of strength. Though her exterior remained pliable to her stepmother's will, her interior was unyielding. She had learned patience, observation, and strategic thought, transforming her suffering into tools for survival. She understood the rhythms of cruelty, the mechanics of manipulation, and the ways in which fear could be turned into power when properly channeled. The weight of cruelty had been immense, pressing upon her daily like an unrelenting tide, yet it did not crush her. Instead, it refined her, teaching lessons that the stepmother had never intended. The girl's inner spirit, long hidden beneath layers of fear and silence, had become a forge in which determination, patience, and intelligence were tempered. When the time came, these qualities would rise from within her like fire breaking through the night, transforming a life of torment into a story of power and triumph. The girl's life under her stepmother's rule was a testament to resilience. She had endured punishments, gossip, public shaming, and isolation, yet none of it had succeeded in extinguishing her inner flame. While the stepmother believed she had succeeded in breaking her, in reality she had forged a spirit capable of withstanding any storm. The cruel days, the whispered insults, the stolen joys, they all contributed to the quiet, unyielding power that now resided within the girl. Her endurance was her weapon, patience her shield, and observation her guide. Though unseen and unacknowledged by those around her, her inner strength had been quietly growing, preparing her for the moment when the world that had tried to crush her would finally bear witness to her unbroken spirit. The stepmother's schemes were intricate and relentless, designed with a cunning mind that had learned to manipulate fear, gossip, and social expectation to her advantage. From the earliest days of the girl's life, she worked quietly to ensure that no one would recognize her value, that no ally could form around her, and that her presence would always be a source of scorn rather than admiration. It began with isolation. The girl's interactions with others were carefully limited. She was forbidden from joining the children at play, excluded from village gatherings, and kept away from neighbors who might have offered kindness or guidance. The stepmother understood that connections were the lifeblood of support, and by severing them she ensured that the girl would be alone, vulnerable, and dependent on her, the only figure controlling her existence. This isolation was compounded by the spread of lies. The stepmother whispered stories into the ears of villagers, stories that painted the girl as strange, unlucky, or even cursed. Rumors circulated about her birth, about her supposed flaws, about how she would bring misfortune to those who trusted her. These falsehoods were subtle at first, seemingly innocent comments that planted seeds of doubt in the minds of those around her. Soon they grew into a chorus of suspicion and avoidance. Friends became hesitant to speak to her, neighbors offered smiles that didn't reach their eyes, and elders looked upon her with a detached wariness that cut deeper than any physical punishment. The stepmother's words were weapons, aimed not at her body but at the very perception of her, shaping the way the entire clan understood her existence. She also manipulated the girl's immediate environment to reinforce the sense of worthlessness. Chores were endless, menial, and often contradictory, ensuring failure no matter how diligently she worked. Praise was withheld even for accomplishments, and mistakes were exaggerated, retold as proof of incompetence or weakness. The stepmother's goal was not only to suppress the girl's spirit but to condition her to accept humiliation as her natural state, so that she might never question the authority of her oppressor. Every action, every task, every moment of the girl's life was orchestrated to reinforce the illusion of inadequacy. The stepmother's plot extended beyond simple isolation and lies. She sought to control the girl's reputation entirely. Village events, festivals, and daily gatherings were opportunities to display the girl as a cautionary example. She would send the girl to fetch water with clothing in tatters, or insist she perform menial tasks in the public eye, ensuring ridicule followed her every step. Even when the girl attempted to rise above these orchestrated humiliations, the stepmother intervened subtly, positioning herself or others to minimize any demonstration of competence. The stepmother's mastery lay in her ability to make the girl feel powerless even when she possessed hidden strengths. Psychological manipulation was another facet of the plan. The stepmother's words were often contradictory, mixing promises with threats, creating confusion and self-doubt. The girl was told she was weak and incapable, but also warned that she must obey perfectly or face consequences far worse than punishment. This constant tension eroded confidence while reinforcing dependence. Over time, the girl learned to suppress her natural instincts, her voice, and her desires, internalizing the stepmother's narrative even as sparks of resistance remained flickering in secret. The stepmother sought to dominate not only behavior but thought, ensuring the girl would doubt her own value at every turn. The stepmother's influence reached others too. She whispered in the ears of children, encouraging them to mock or exclude the girl. She spoke to village women, twisting small incidents into evidence of the girl's inadequacy, ensuring that gossip reinforced her control. Even the men, who might have otherwise intervened, were influenced by subtle insinuations that the girl was trouble or misfortune. By manipulating social perception, the stepmother effectively created a wall around the girl, built not only from physical barriers but from collective mistrust and isolation. The clan became complicit in her oppression, often unknowingly because the stepmother had framed her as a problem, a burden, or a liability. Through these tactics, the girl was made to feel small, dependent, and powerless. Her successes were ignored, her mistakes magnified, and her potential suppressed. Yet, paradoxically, the very intensity of this suppression began to cultivate something in her: an awareness, a keen observation, and a quiet determination. While the stepmother believed she had succeeded in erasing her, the girl's mind began to analyze patterns, notice weaknesses, and understand the mechanics of control. Each lie, each isolation, each act of humiliation became data to study, revealing the fragility of her oppressor's power and planting the seeds of future resistance. Despite the stepmother's efforts, the girl retained a hidden resilience. The plotting, the lies, and the isolation shaped her, teaching lessons of patience, endurance, and subtle strategy. Though outwardly submissive and obedient, she internalized knowledge that would one day enable her to dismantle the carefully constructed web of oppression. Every insult, every whispered lie, every public display of humiliation became fuel for a growing understanding of human weakness, the patterns of manipulation, and the ways in which power could be seized when least expected. The stepmother, confident in her success, failed to recognize that her meticulous efforts had created not a broken child but a quietly calculating mind, a spirit capable of enduring any hardship and biding its time. Each element of the plot, the isolation, the rumors, the manipulation of perception, the control over relationships, had been intended to erase the girl's existence in the social and emotional fabric of the clan. Yet these same elements became tools in the girl's eventual arsenal, equipping her with insight into both the mechanics of cruelty and the pathways to reclaiming her rightful place. In the end, the stepmother's plot, no matter how carefully executed, could not achieve its ultimate aim. She had sought to destroy, to erase, to turn an entire clan against the girl, but she had unwittingly strengthened the girl's resolve. Every act of cruelty, every lie spread through the clan, every enforced isolation served as a lesson in patience, strategy, and endurance. And though the girl bore the burden of suffering, her spirit remained intact, quietly preparing for the day when the truth would rise, when her power would emerge, and when the stepmother's manipulations would be laid bare for all to see. Through isolation, lies, and relentless scheming, the stepmother had attempted to erase the girl completely. Yet instead of annihilation, she had forged resilience. The girl's mind became sharper, her awareness more acute, and her patience unbreakable. The stepmother's plan, meant to destroy, had inadvertently built the foundation of a strategy that would one day shake everyone in the clan, proving that no scheme of cruelty could ultimately overcome a spirit that refused to be broken. The girl's exile from home marked the culmination of years of silent suffering and relentless oppression. Her stepmother, convinced that she had successfully broken the girl's spirit, cast her out with a finality that was intended to erase her from the clan's life entirely. The moment she stepped beyond the familiar threshold of the household, the girl felt the weight of abandonment, isolation, and betrayal. The air outside, once familiar and comforting, now seemed heavy with uncertainty. Every step she took away from the walls that had confined her was a step into the unknown, a world that offered freedom but also carried danger and loneliness. Her body ached from years of harsh labor and punishment, muscles sore and skin bruised, yet within her, despite exhaustion and pain, flickered a seed of determination that refused to be extinguished. The journey of exile was both physical and emotional. She traversed paths she had never been allowed to explore, each footstep echoing with memories of humiliation, each glance at the horizon reminding her of the life left behind. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, fatigue pressed against her shoulders, and the elements offered no comfort, yet these hardships only strengthened her resolve. The girl realized that she could not rely on anyone but herself. She had survived the calculated cruelty of her stepmother, the whispers of the clan, and the endless isolation of her childhood. Now in exile, survival would be her first teacher, and patience would remain her most steadfast ally. As she traveled through unfamiliar lands, she began to observe the world with a keener eye than ever before. She noticed the rhythms of nature, the signs of weather, the patterns of animal behavior, and the small communities she encountered along the way. Each observation was an opportunity to learn, to understand, and to prepare. She discovered resources where none seemed to exist, finding water in hidden streams, shelter in caves and abandoned huts, and food from plants and animals that would have been overlooked by an untrained eye. These experiences, while born of necessity, became lessons in independence and resilience. The girl's mind, sharpened by years of oppression and observation, now turned its focus outward, studying the environment as carefully as she had studied her stepmother's household. Exile also offered emotional lessons. The girl grappled with feelings of anger, betrayal, sadness, and fear. The absence of familiar faces, even those who had tormented her, created a void that both pained and liberated her. She mourned the life that had been stolen, the opportunities denied, and the family that had hidden her truth. Yet within that mourning she also discovered the strength to forgive herself for her perceived failures, to accept that the past could not be changed, and to focus on the power she held over her own future. Each day in exile reinforced her self-reliance, teaching her that emotional endurance was as critical as physical survival. The girl's nights in exile were often long and lonely, yet they became a time for reflection and planning. She would sit beneath the stars, listening to the wind whisper through the trees, and ponder the injustices she had endured. She remembered her stepmother's cruelty, the lies spread through the clan, and the countless days of isolation. These memories, rather than weakening her, became the foundation of her determination. She envisioned a future in which she could reclaim her dignity, reveal the truth of her identity, and expose the cruelty that had sought to erase her. In these quiet hours, the seeds of a plan began to grow, nurtured by patience, strategy, and the unwavering belief that she was not powerless. Along the way, the girl encountered both strangers and allies, though she approached each with caution. Years of manipulation and betrayal had taught her to read people carefully, to detect deception, and to protect her inner thoughts. She learned to navigate conversations, assess intentions, and form bonds cautiously, never revealing the full measure of her knowledge or strength too soon. Trust was now a deliberate act, not an automatic one, and each connection she formed was carefully considered, contributing to the larger strategy she was beginning to envision. Her social intelligence, developed in silence and observation, became a critical tool in her journey of exile, allowing her to gather support without exposing vulnerability. Despite the hardships of exile, the girl's spirit remained unbroken. The physical bruises would heal, and the emotional scars, though deep, became reminders of her endurance. Every challenge she faced, hunger, cold, loneliness, and uncertainty, served to reinforce the inner strength she had cultivated over years of oppression. She discovered a capacity for resilience that surpassed anything she had known within the walls of her stepmother's home. With each obstacle overcome, she gained confidence, strategic insight, and a growing sense of autonomy. As the days stretched into weeks, the girl began to envision her return, not as a powerless victim, but as someone transformed by experience. The seeds of determination she carried were nurtured by adversity, growing quietly but surely into a formidable resolve. She envisioned a plan that would expose lies, reclaim respect, and restore justice, not through rash anger but through calculated, deliberate action. Her mind, strengthened by observation and reflection, became a blueprint for strategy, while her body, tempered by hardship, provided the endurance necessary to see it through. The exile, harsh and lonely as it was, became a crucible in which the girl's character, intellect, and spirit were forged. Every hardship, every moment of isolation, and every struggle against despair contributed to her growing power. Though she had been cast out to break her, exile instead became her teacher, revealing her resilience, sharpening her mind, and nurturing the seeds of determination that would one day blossom into a force capable of shaking the clan to its core. By the time she approached the edges of the lands she had wandered, the girl was no longer simply the victim of her stepmother's cruelty. She was a young woman of quiet strength, prepared to act with purpose, patience, and intelligence. The suffering she had endured, the lessons of survival, and the careful observation of human behavior had equipped her with the tools to return not with fear or desperation, but with a plan, one that would ensure that those who had tried to destroy her would recognize the consequences of underestimating a spirit forged in adversity. In the solitude of exile, the girl began to encounter guidance that felt almost otherworldly, yet profoundly practical. It was not the guidance of someone offering quick fixes or mere comfort, but rather the kind that demanded attention, introspection, and careful consideration. She noticed signs in her surroundings. The rustling of leaves carried patterns in the wind, the song of birds seemed to punctuate moments of reflection, and the way the river curved through the land mirrored the winding paths of thought she had to follow. At first, she thought these signs were coincidental, simple coincidences of nature. But over time she realized that they carried messages, subtle lessons from the world itself, teaching her to observe, to think, and to act with foresight. One night, as the girl slept beneath a grove of ancient trees, a vision came to her in her dreams. She saw herself standing in the center of her village, calm yet commanding, while the stepmother's lies unraveled before everyone's eyes. The faces of villagers twisted in shock and awe, realizing their complicity in the injustices she had endured. In the vision, the girl did not lash out with fury or burn with uncontrolled anger. Instead in the quiet seclusion of exile, the girl understood that raw strength alone would not be enough to reclaim her place or confront the injustices she had endured. She needed preparation, meticulous and deliberate, to ensure that when the moment came, she would act with precision rather than desperation. Each day became a lesson, a step in a carefully plotted path toward mastery over herself, her surroundings, and the knowledge that would ultimately empower her to challenge her oppressors. She began with her body, knowing that endurance, agility, and physical resilience were as crucial as mental acuity. Daily routines of running, climbing, and balancing taught her to navigate varied terrain, to react instinctively to sudden changes, and to endure hardship without faltering. Her muscles grew strong not merely for defense, but for the physical confidence that comes from mastery over one's own form. Alongside physical training, the girl devoted herself to mental fortification. Years of observation under her stepmother's rule had honed her awareness, but in exile she could expand that awareness beyond survival instincts. She studied the behaviors of those around her, recognizing patterns in human interaction, understanding subtle signals of power and weakness. She reflected on her own responses, learning to control fear, anger, and impatience, transforming emotion into deliberate action. Meditation and reflection became daily rituals, sharpening her focus and clarifying her long-term objectives. She began to envision scenarios, test outcomes in her mind, and adapt her strategies to the unpredictable variables of life outside the household. In addition to personal development, the girl sought allies cautiously and selectively. She traveled to nearby villages and remote homesteads, seeking individuals who displayed wisdom, courage, or integrity. She observed from a distance, learning who could be trusted and who might betray her. Some were elders who remembered her family, their knowledge offering fragments of the truths her stepmother had hidden. Others were peers, perhaps victims of injustice themselves, who recognized the fire in her eyes and the intelligence in her demeanor. She approached each alliance with subtlety, careful not to reveal her full intentions too soon, yet nurturing bonds that would one day contribute to the broader plan she was weaving. Every conversation, every act of kindness, and every shared story became part of the network she was quietly building, strengthening her social and strategic position for the future. Uncovering truths about herself and her lineage became another critical component of preparation. She found remnants of her family's past in the form of letters, tokens, and relics hidden in abandoned homes, forested clearings, or passed down through discreet allies. Each discovery added context to the stepmother's cruelty, revealing not only the reasons behind her concealment but also the potential power, influence, or legacy the girl had inherited. These truths transformed her understanding of herself from a passive victim into someone with a heritage of resilience, leadership, or skill. Knowledge became both armor and weapon. It gave her purpose, direction, and a moral clarity that strengthened her resolve. During this period of preparation, the girl also developed skills that extended beyond brute strength or strategic thought. She learned to communicate persuasively, to read intentions without explicit statements, and to negotiate with subtlety and authority. She studied local customs, traditions, and power structures, understanding the mechanisms that governed her former clan and their neighbors. This education allowed her to plan her eventual return with precision, knowing not only how to expose deceit but also how to protect herself against retaliation or miscalculation. Each skill, while developed quietly, was deliberately chosen to serve a specific purpose in her broader strategy. Her preparations were not limited to practical or intellectual skills. She also nurtured her inner fire. Reflection, meditation, and observation taught her patience and self-control, while moments of solitude encouraged creativity and insight. She envisioned multiple scenarios, anticipating the stepmother's possible reactions, the villagers' responses, and the potential obstacles that might arise. This mental rehearsal strengthened her confidence and allowed her to refine contingency plans, ensuring that her eventual actions would be deliberate and effective rather than impulsive. She understood that her success would not rely solely on reaction but on forethought, planning, and the careful orchestration of timing and circumstance. Every element of her preparation was interconnected. Physical conditioning allowed her to endure challenges, mental sharpening enabled her to analyze and adapt, alliances provided support and information, and knowledge of her lineage gave her purpose and legitimacy. She was building an integrated system of capabilities, each reinforcing the other so that when the time came to act, she would move with efficiency and authority. The girl understood that preparation was not a singular act but a cumulative process in which every day, every effort, and every observation contributed to the hidden strategy she was assembling piece by piece. During this time, the girl also tested her emerging abilities quietly. She simulated confrontations, observed reactions in neutral situations, and practiced self-restraint while evaluating how to use her skills effectively. Each test revealed areas for improvement and helped her refine her approach. Patience and adaptability became her hallmarks, ensuring that when she returned, she would do so not with rash vengeance but with deliberate, undeniable impact. As seasons changed and the years of preparation accumulated, the girl transformed completely. She emerged from exile not as the broken, oppressed child her stepmother had cast aside, but as a young woman of calculated power, strategic intelligence, and unwavering resolve. The training, the alliances, the discoveries, and the reflections all converged into a cohesive plan. Every step of her journey had been purposefully designed, each moment of hardship converted into a lesson, and every insight gained stored as part of a reservoir of strength and wisdom. By the time she considered her return to the clan, the girl was prepared on every level: physical, mental, social, and emotional. She had cultivated skills, gathered support, and nurtured knowledge that would allow her to reclaim her rightful position and confront the stepmother's lies. The time of preparation had transformed adversity into power, isolation into strategy, and suffering into foresight. Her silent, deliberate efforts in exile had laid the foundation for a return that would not only challenge cruelty but ensure that justice, dignity, and truth prevailed. The day of her return was quiet at first, almost unremarkable to those who went about their daily routines, unaware that a storm of transformation was approaching their village. The girl, once hidden, oppressed, and silenced, now moved with a calm yet undeniable authority. Every step she took was deliberate, each gesture measured and confident. Her appearance had changed, not in mere beauty though she had grown into it, but in the radiance of purpose, the subtle aura of someone who had endured and emerged stronger. Villagers who caught sight of her first hesitated, unsure if they recognized the same girl who had once been cast out and mocked. She carried herself differently, upright and unflinching, her eyes reflecting wisdom, patience, and the quiet fire of a spirit no longer chained. Word of her presence spread quickly, as news in a tightly knit community always did. Whispers rippled through the streets and alleys. Is it really her? The one they tried to destroy? She looks different, stronger. Even before she entered the central square, tension began to weave itself into the fabric of daily life. People paused their work, children stopped playing, and conversations faltered mid-sentence. Her return was more than a physical arrival. It was a seismic shift in the emotional and psychological landscape of the village. The air itself seemed charged with anticipation, a prelude to the revelation that would challenge every assumption the clan had held about her and her place among them. As she walked past familiar homes, the memories of exile and the years of preparation surged within her. Each house, each path, each familiar tree seemed to whisper the hardships endured and the lessons learned. She did not rush. Her pace was deliberate, commanding attention without effort. Every glance from villagers met with a composed, unwavering gaze, her demeanor communicating confidence, intelligence, and the silent promise that the girl they had once sought to break was no longer the same. The subtle shift in power was palpable, even to those who had once felt themselves in complete control. Her presence alone unsettled the familiar order. The stepmother, still ensconced in her home, sensed the approaching disruption before anyone spoke of it. Something in the air changed, a ripple of unease that she could not name. When the girl entered the village center, the stepmother's heart thumped with fear and disbelief. Years of schemes, lies, and manipulation had led her to believe that the girl was broken, defeated, and harmless. And yet, here she was, fully formed, confident, and radiating a quiet but undeniable authority. The stepmother's mind raced, trying to anticipate this unexpected development, yet she realized with a creeping panic that she was unprepared. The power dynamics had shifted, and the years of oppression that once guaranteed control now appeared as steps toward a reckoning she could no longer forestall. Villagers watched as the girl paused in the center of the gathering space, scanning familiar faces with calm precision. Some averted their eyes, guilt rising unbidden. Others could not look away, compelled by the magnetic presence of someone who had survived cruelty and returned with purpose. Children who had once mocked her felt a mixture of awe and fear. Elders who had dismissed her presence now questioned their past judgments. The balance of authority in the village, once so clear, now hung suspended, trembling under the weight of her return. The girl's silent power was evident in the way people shifted instinctively, creating space, adjusting posture, and restraining speech. Her very being was a challenge to the false hierarchy that had oppressed her. She did not need to speak immediately, her entrance alone carried meaning. Every detail of her appearance, the calm set of her shoulders, the intensity of her gaze, the fluidity of her movement, signaled change, growth, and readiness. Those who had underestimated her felt the tension tighten around them, an unspoken acknowledgement that the girl who had once endured humiliation had evolved into someone whose mind and spirit were no longer bound by fear. The stepmother trembled visibly, realizing that every strategy she had relied upon in the past had been insufficient to prepare for this moment. As villagers began to murmur among themselves, the girl allowed subtle gestures to assert her presence further. A small, deliberate glance toward those who had wronged her, a pause to meet the eyes of former mockers, a composed but steady smile, all conveyed that she was aware of every injustice and had transformed those experiences into clarity and determination. The energy she carried was palpable, a force that demanded recognition without the need for shouting, a presence that unsettled the complacency of those who had once felt secure in their authority. It became evident to everyone that this was no longer the timid, oppressed girl they had known. She was a calculated, observant, and unstoppable force. The psychological effect on the village was profound. People found themselves reassessing past actions, questioning loyalties, and feeling the weight of their complicity in her suffering. Those who had once aligned with the stepmother's manipulation hesitated, unsure where their allegiance should now lie. The power dynamic that had governed the village for years had been irrevocably altered. The girl's return was not merely physical, it was symbolic. A signal that oppression had consequences and that endurance, intelligence, and strategic planning could transform a victim into a figure of influence and authority. Her stepmother, confronted by the undeniable shift, attempted to assert control, to mask fear with anger, but it was ineffective. The girl's composed presence countered every feigned threat, every attempt at intimidation, and every manipulative gesture. In that moment, the stepmother realized that she had underestimated the girl at every turn, and that the years of silent observation, preparation, and growth had culminated in a force that could not be resisted by fear or coercion alone. The girl's return had become the fulcrum upon which the balance of power would pivot. By the time the girl stepped fully into the center of the village, it was clear to all that something profound had occurred. She was no longer the broken child cast aside. She was a strategic, aware, and commanding presence. Her return embodied patience, resilience, and the culmination of preparation, demonstrating that transformation and careful planning could overcome cruelty, fear, and oppression. The villagers, witnessing this, were forced to recognize her authority, her strength, and the undeniable truth that she had returned not as a victim, but as someone capable of reshaping the destiny of the clan itself. The moment had arrived for the girl to put into motion the plan she had cultivated over years of exile, preparation, and observation. Every thought, every skill, and every alliance had been carefully considered for this very occasion. She knew that timing, subtlety, and precision were critical. Rash actions or overt displays of anger would only give the stepmother and her enablers an opportunity to resist, discredit, or undermine her. Instead, she moved deliberately, letting her presence command attention while allowing her strategy to unfold with calculated effectiveness. Her return was not merely a statement of power, it was the beginning of a carefully orchestrated revelation that would change the balance of the clan entirely. She began by observing the villagers and leaders, noting their fears, their loyalties, and their assumptions. Conversations that once would have gone unnoticed were now carefully examined, and small gestures, glances, pauses, shifts in posture, were recorded mentally, helping her anticipate responses and manipulate outcomes. The girl understood that influence was as much about perception as reality. She needed the villagers to recognize her authority not merely through force, but through the undeniable clarity of truth, the strength of evidence, and the integrity of her actions. She moved with quiet confidence through the village, interacting with people in ways that subtly revealed the contrast between herself and her stepmother. Where cruelty had once prevailed, she demonstrated patience. Where deceit had been the norm, she showed honesty. Where intimidation had ruled, she offered fairness and reason. The first stage of her plan involved exposing the stepmother's lies and manipulations. Using the information and proof gathered during her exile, she revealed the false narratives that had been constructed to discredit her. Letters, tokens, and recollections from allies were presented to villagers in controlled, precise ways, each piece of evidence reinforcing her story and undermining the web of deceit the stepmother had spun. She did not shout or demand belief. Instead, she allowed the facts to speak for themselves, letting the clarity of truth resonate with the villagers' sense of justice. As the web of lies unraveled, murmurs of realization spread among the crowd, and the stepmother's authority began to crumble, leaving her increasingly isolated and unprotected. Simultaneously, the girl worked to win the hearts of the people. She listened to their concerns, offered solutions to lingering issues, and demonstrated understanding of the hardships they had endured under the stepmother's regime. Her actions were measured and thoughtful. She helped repair what had been neglected, mediated conflicts, and provided guidance based on knowledge she had gained during her exile. By addressing the practical needs and emotional wounds of the villagers, she built a network of trust and loyalty that strengthened her position. They saw in her someone who combined strength with wisdom, resilience with compassion, and authority with fairness. A stark contrast to the manipulation and fear that had previously governed their lives. Part of her plan involved revealing the stepmother's cruelty in ways that could not be denied or ignored. She recounted specific instances, corroborated by witnesses and tangible proof, showing the extent to which the stepmother had sought to suppress, harm, and erase her. Each revelation was delivered with calm precision, leaving no room for argument or deflection. The villagers, many of whom had once been complicit through silence or fear, began to grasp the full scope of injustice they had witnessed or tolerated. The cumulative effect was powerful. The stepmother, once feared, became a figure of shame and isolation, while the girl's authority, derived not from intimidation but from truth and moral clarity, grew steadily stronger. The girl also leveraged her allies in subtle but impactful ways. Those who had supported her during exile, elders, peers, and even neutral observers, provided testimony, guidance, and validation. Their voices reinforced hers, amplifying her credibility and lending weight to her revelations. The collective acknowledgement of truth created a momentum that the stepmother could not resist or counter. By orchestrating these interactions carefully, the girl ensured that every step of her plan contributed to the larger strategy, reinforcing her credibility, consolidating her influence, and weakening her stepmother's position. Strategically, she allowed moments of tension to build, ensuring that the village fully recognized the contrast between her integrity and the stepmother's deceit. Silence, observation, and subtle gestures were employed as tools of influence, creating suspense that heightened the impact of each revelation. Villagers watched, considered, and ultimately responded with acknowledgement and respect. The girl's plan was not an impulsive display of power, but a deliberate, multi-layered approach designed to achieve maximum effect while minimizing unnecessary conflict. Throughout the unfolding of her plan, she maintained complete composure, never allowing the stepmother's fear, anger, or attempts at manipulation to disrupt her strategy. Every reaction was anticipated, every statement calculated, and every action deliberate. She had transformed the lessons of exile, preparation, and reflection into practical tactics, demonstrating the culmination of years of patience and endurance. The village, once dominated by fear and deception, began to shift its loyalty, admiration, and trust toward her. By the time the full scope of her strategy had taken shape, the clan was fully aware of the stepmother's deceit, cruelty, and failed authority. The girl, having executed her plan with precision, now stood as a figure of undeniable influence and respect. Her careful orchestration had not only exposed wrongdoing but had reshaped the social and moral fabric of the village, ensuring that the consequences of cruelty were clear and that justice, tempered with wisdom and strategy, had prevailed. Every piece of the plan, revelation, persuasion, exposure, and demonstration of competence, worked together seamlessly. Her return, while dramatic, was not the end. It was the beginning of a reordering of values, a realignment of power, and a transformation in how the villagers perceived justice, integrity, and strength. The girl had returned not as a victim or reactive force, but as a calculated, commanding presence whose strategy reshaped her world and ensured that the stepmother could no longer dominate through fear or lies.